wind that swept down from the high plains of the Texas-Oklahoma borderlands did not care for treaties. It did not care for the lines drawn on paper by politicians in Washington, nor for the fences that men like Colton Briggs tried to hammer into the hard, unyielding earth. It blew cold and sharp, carrying the scent of dry sagebrush, turning grass, and the coming winter. Tahan sat atop his painted stallion, a beast with a coat like storm clouds and snow, and watched the horizon. At 23 years of age, Tahan felt older than the rocks beneath the hooves of his horse. He was a warrior of the Comanche, a man whose chest bore the scars of the Sundance and whose quiver held arrows fletched with hawk feathers. Yet, as he sat there, the morning sun painting his bronze skin in shades of copper and gold, he did not feel like a master of the plains. He felt like a man holding back a landslide with his bare hands. Below him, in the shelter of the canyon, lay the encampment of his people via the Quahati Band. It was a shadow of what it had been 10 years ago. The teepees, sewn from buffalo hides, were fewer in number now. The smoke that rose from the morning fires was thin. The great herds of buffalo, the lifeblood of the Comanche, were vanishing, leaving behind bleached bones and empty bellies. Tahan turned his horse, the animal responding to the slightest pressure of his knees, and descended the slope. He rode with a straight back, his long black hair braided with strips of red cloth, a single eagle feather tied at the back. He wore a buckskin shirt adorned with beadwork that his mother had made before the coughing sickness took her, and heavy leggings to protect against the brush. At his hip, he carried a knife, and across his back was his bow, but tucked into a leather scabbard on his saddle was a Winchester repeating rifle, a cold, heavy reminder of the changing world. As he rode through the camp, the reality of their situation pressed in on him. He saw old men sitting by the fires, their eyes clouded with cataracts and memories of better days. He saw women scraping hides that were too thin, trying to stretch meager rations of dried meat to feed children whose ribs showed too clearly against their brown skin. "Tahan!" a voice called out. He pulled his horse to a halt and looked down. It was Ahote, his childhood friend and brother in all but blood. Ahote was stocky and fierce, with a scar running through his left eyebrow that gave him a perpetual scowl, unlike Tahan, who had learned the tongue of the white man to survive. Ahote refused to speak it. He hated the encroaching settlers with a fire that burned hot and dangerous. "You go to the white man's town today," Ahote said in their native tongue, his hand resting on the neck of Tahan's horse. It was not a question. "We need supplies." "Ahote," Tahan replied, keeping his voice calm. "The winter will be hard. We have no salt. The flour is gone. An elder Hato needs the medicine that only the doctor in Rio Sombra possesses." Ahote spat on the ground. "We should take what we need. We are the lords of the plains. Why do we beg for scraps from those who steal our land?" "Because if we raid, the soldiers will come," Tahan said, his eyes hardening. "Not just a patrol, the whole regiment from Fort Sill. Do you want to see the women and children running through the snow again? Do you want to bury another brother?" Ahote's jaw tightened, the muscles bunching. He looked away, towards the distant rise where the soldiers often patrolled. "Better to die fighting than to starve slowly in a cage they call a reservation." "I do not intend to starve," Tahan said softly. "And I do not intend to die today. I go to trade. It is the agreement." "The agreement," Ahote scoffed. "A paper shield against a bullet." Tahan did not answer. He nudged his horse forward, leaving his friend standing in the dust. He knew Ahote was right in his heart, but Tahan could not afford the luxury of pure anger. He had to think of survival. He stopped before the largest lodge, where Elder Hato waited. Hato was frail now, his skin like crumpled parchment, but his mind was still sharp. He sat on a buffalo robe, wrapped in a wool blanket that had seen better days. "Grandfather," Tahan greeted him respectfully, stepping inside the dim lodge. "Sit, my son," Hato whispered. He gestured to the fire. "You will leave soon?" "Yes, the sun is climbing. It is a long ride to Rio Sombra." Hato nodded slowly. He reached into a pouch at his side and pulled out a small bag of coins, silver dollars, and a few gold pieces, gathered from years of trading and, in the old days, raiding. "This is all we have. Make it count. Salt first, then powder and lead, then the flour, if there is enough, the medicine for my chest." "I will get the medicine first." "Grandfather," Tahan promised. Hato smiled weakly. "You are a good man, Tahan, like your father. But you must be careful. The white men, they are like the coyote. They smile while they circle you." "I know," Tahan said. The mention of his father sent a sharp pang through his chest. "I will carry the white flag. They cannot touch us under the flag." Hato sighed, a rattling sound in his lungs. "Your father carried a flag too. Do not forget that. Be polite. Speak their tongue as I taught you. But keep your hand near your knife. Peace is a fragile thing. Tahan, it is like a bird's egg. One squeeze, and it is gone." "I will return," Tahan said, rising. "With the supplies." "Go with the spirits," Hato murmured, closing his eyes. 30 miles to the east, the world looked very different. Colton Briggs stood on the veranda of his ranch house, a sprawling structure of timber and stone that dominated the landscape. He held a crystal glass of whiskey in one hand, the amber liquid catching the morning light. Briggs was a large man, heavy-set but solid, with a face reddened by wind and drink. He wore a suit of fine wool, dusty at the hems, and boots made of expensive leather. He looked out over his empire. Thousands of cattle grazed on the swaying grass, a sea of red and brown hides. This was his land. He had fought for it, paid for it, and he intended to keep it. "Mr. Briggs," a voice came from behind him. It was his foreman, a wiry man named Silas with a mustache that drooped over his mouth. "What is it, Silas?" Briggs asked, not turning around. "The boys found another fence cut near the creek, and 2 steer missing. Looks like Comanche work." Briggs drained his glass and turned, his blue eyes cold and hard. "Comanche work, or maybe just hungry wolves. It does not matter. It serves the purpose." He walked to the table where a map was spread out, pinned down by a knife and an empty bottle. He tapped a thick finger on a section of the map labeled Indian Territory. "I need that water access." "Silas," Briggs growled, "to drive the herd north to the railhead. I have to go 50 miles out of my way to go around their land. 50 miles. That is weight lost on the cattle. That is time. That is money." "The treaty says that land belongs to the Quahati band," Silas pointed out, though his tone suggested he didn't care much for treaties either. "The treaty is a piece of paper signed by weak men in Washington who have never seen a savage up close." Briggs spat. "I've been talking to the major at the fort. He agrees that the reservation lines are fluid. We just need a reason. A spark. A spark." "If the Comanche break the peace," Briggs said, a cruel smile touching his lips. "If they attack a citizen, or steal a woman, or kill a white man, then the army has to act. The treaty is void, and that land becomes open range." He looked back out at the horizon, towards the west. "I am tired of waiting. Silas, if they do not give me a reason, I might just have to help them find one." Tahan rode out of the canyon with 3 other braves behind him. They were young, like him, chosen for their discipline. They knew the rules: no weapons drawn, no war cries, no eye contact that could be mistaken for a challenge. They rode in silence, the rhythmic thud of hooves on the hard earth the only sound. Tahan carried the white flag, a piece of bleached cotton cloth tied to a long willow branch. It fluttered in the wind, snapping starkly against the blue sky. As they crossed the open prairie, Tahan's mind drifted back to the day his father died. It was 5 years ago. The memories were as sharp as fresh flint. He remembered the meeting ground. His father, a proud chief, had ridden out to meet the blue-coat soldiers. He, too, had carried a white flag. He had gone to talk about the buffalo hunters who were slaughtering the herds for sport, leaving the meat to rot. He had gone to ask for the boundaries to be respected. Tahan, then just a boy of 18, had watched from the ridge, He saw the handshake. He saw the smile on the colonel's face. And then he saw the flash of the hidden rifle from the wagon. His father had fallen without a sound. The chaos that followed the screaming horses, the return fire, the retreat was a blur of blood and dust, but the image of the white flag, stained red with his father's blood, was burned into his soul. Tahan gripped the reins tighter, his knuckles white. He had hated the white men then. He had wanted to kill them all. But Hato had pulled him back from the edge of madness. Revenge is a fire that burns the house down, Hato had said. You must live for the people. A dead warrior feeds no children. So Tahan had learned their language. He had studied their ways. He had become the bridge. But it was a bridge built over a river of suspicion. Tahan, one of the braves behind him whispered. Look! Tahan snapped back to the present. Ahead of them, rising from the dusty plains like a blister on the earth, was the town of Rio Sombra. It was not a grand city. It was a collection of wooden buildings huddled together against the wind, their paint peeled by the sun. A church steeple pointed an accusing finger at the sky. The sounds of hammers ringing on anvils and the distant bark of dogs drifted on the breeze. To Tahan, it smelled of unwashed bodies, coal smoke, and fear. Keep your eyes forward, Tahan commanded his men in their tongues. Do not touch your weapons unless I say, we are here to trade. We are invisible. They slowed their horses to a walk. The white flag snapped loudly above Tahan's head. As they approached the outskirts of the town, he saw the change in the air. A wagon driver pulled his team of mules to a halt and stared, his hand dropping to the shotgun on the seat next to him. A woman hanging laundry froze, clutching a sheet to her chest, her eyes wide with terror. They saw monsters, Tahan thought bitterly. They saw savages who came in the night to scalp and burn. They did not see 4 young men who were hungry, who were worried about their grandfather's cough, who just wanted to buy salt. He felt the familiar tension coil in his stomach, a snake ready to strike. He forced himself to relax his shoulders. He forced his face into a mask of stoic calm. If they betray us again, the thought whispers in his mind, dark and seductive. If they hurt one of my brothers today, I will not bow. I will not drive away. I will make the ground drink their blood. He pushed the thought away, but he did not extinguish it. He kept it close, like the knife at his hip. Steady, Tahan murmured to his stallion. They passed the first building, a blacksmith shop. The smith, a giant of a man with arms like tree trunks, stopped hammering and stepped out, holding a glowing red horseshoe with tongs. He glared at Tahan, spitting a stream of tobacco juice near the stallion's hooves. Tahan did not flinch. He looked straight ahead, towards the center of town, towards the general store. Rio Sombra was waiting for them. The main street was wide and rutted with wagon tracks. The boardwalks were lined with men who stopped their conversations to watch the Indians ride in. Tahan could feel their eyes crawling over him. He could feel the hatred radiating off them like heat from a stove. But he also felt the weight of the silver in his pouch. He felt the responsibility of the tribe on his shoulders. He was Tahan, son of the fallen chief. He would complete this mission. He would buy the supplies, and he would ride out with his head high. He did not know yet that the spirits had a different plan for him today. He did not know that inside this dusty town of hate, he would find something that would shatter his world more completely than any bullet. He rode past the saloon, where the piano music stopped abruptly. He rode past the sheriff's office, where a man with a tin star stepped out onto the boardwalk, his thumb hooked in his gun belt. Tahan halted his horse in front of the general store. The silence in the street was heavy, thick enough to choke on. He waited for a moment, letting the white flag hang still in the sudden drop of the wind. Then, with a fluid motion, he swung his leg over the saddle and dropped to the ground, his moccasins making no sound in the dust. He patted his horse's neck, signaled for his brothers to stay mounted and watchful, and turned to face the door of the white man's world. The air was electric, waiting for a spark. And Tahan, standing tall in the center of Rio Sombra, was the lightning rod. Sheriff Daly stood on the boardwalk, his thumb hooked over his belt buckle, watching the 4 riders approach. The badge on his chest caught the midday sun, a silver star tarnished by dust and time. He did not reach for his Colt, but the tension in his shoulders was clear enough to read from 50 yards away. Tahan urged his stallion forward on a walk. The animal was nervous, sensing the hostility that hung in the air like static before a thunderstorm. To his left and right, the other braves kept their hands visible on their reins, their eyes scanning the rooftops and the shadows between buildings. They were young. Their blood ran hot, but they obeyed Tahan's command for stillness. "Steady," Tahan murmured in Comanche, low enough that only his horse and his brothers could hear. As they passed the sheriff, Daly spat a stream of brown tobacco juice into the dirt, missing the hooves of Tahan's horse by inches. It was a petty insult, a marking of territory. Tahan did not look down. He kept his gaze fixed on the painted sign of the general store ahead. He would not give the lawman the satisfaction of a reaction. They reined in at the hitching rail. The town of Rio Sombra seemed to hold its breath. A curtain twitched in a window across the street. A dog barked once and was silenced by a sharp kick from its owner. "Watch the horses," Tahan ordered Ahote. "Do not let them provoke you." Ahote's jaw was set like granite, his dark eyes burning with a mixture of hatred and humiliation. But he nodded. Tahan took the saddlebags containing the furs and the coins, then stepped up onto the wooden boardwalk. The sound of his moccasins was a soft whisper against the heavy thud of boots that usually walked there. Inside the general store, the air was thick with the smells of ground coffee, cured leather, and dry goods. Particles of dust danced in the shafts of light cutting through the gloom. The proprietor, a balding man named Henderson with eyes like polished beads, stood behind the counter. He stopped wiping a glass jar as Tahan approached. Tahan placed the bundle of furs on the counter: beaver, fox, and a single prime buffalo robe. "Supplies," Tahan said. His English was accented but clear, learned from the traders in the long winters listening to the stories of the elders. "Salt, flour, black powder." Henderson looked at the furs, poking them with a disdainful finger. "Market is down on hides. Chief, not worth much." Tahan knew this was a lie. The robe alone was worth enough to feed a family for a month in the settlements further east. But he also knew that in Rio Sombra, the price of being Comanche was steep. "Salt," Tahan repeated, placing the small bag of silver coins Hato had given him on the counter beside the furs. "And medicine, for the chest cough," Henderson sniffed, opening the bag and spilling the coins out. He counted them slowly, his lips moving. "Dr. Morgan is the only one with good medicine. This might cover the salt and half a sack of flour. Powder is extra, government tax." It was robbery, plain and simple. Tahan felt the heat rise in his neck. He remembered his father's voice. Pieces of bird's egg. If he crushed it now, his grandfather would die without medicine. "Take the silver," Tahan said, his voice flat. "Take the furs. Give what is fair." Henderson smirked, sweeping the coins into a drawer. He began to measure out the flour, his movements agonizingly slow. While Tahan waited, the bell above the door jingled. 2 cowboys stumbled in, bringing the stench of whiskey and unwashed bodies with them. They wore the brand of the Double B Colton Briggs outfit. "Well, look at this," one of them sneered, leaning against a barrel of crackers. "Smells like a wet dog in here, doesn't it, Bill?" "Sure does," the other laughed. "Hey, boy, you lost the reservation, is that way?" He pointed vaguely towards the door. Tahan did not turn. He kept his eyes on Henderson's hands, watching the scoop of flour. "I am speaking to you, Redskin," the first cowboy said. Stepping closer, he reached out and flicked the eagle feather in Tahan's hair. In a heartbeat, Tahan caught the man's wrist. He did not squeeze, but he held it firm, an iron grip that stopped the man cold. For a second, the store went silent. The violence was there, a drawn bowstring waiting to snap. Tahan looked into the cowboy's eyes, seeing the watery fear behind the alcohol. "I trade," Tahan said softly. "Then I go." He released the wrist. The cowboy stumbled back, rubbing his arm. his face flushing red with shame and anger. Before he could draw his weapon, the sound of shouting erupted from the street outside. It was a raucous, jeering noise, the sound of a mob that had found a sport. "What in blazes is that?" Henderson grumbled, abandoning the flour sack to move to the window. Tahan sensed the change in the air. The tension in the store evaporated, replaced by a new, darker curiosity. He grabbed the half-filled sack of flour and the small bottle of syrup Henderson had placed on the counter. "The rest," Tahan demanded. "Take it and get out." Henderson waved a hand dismissively, his attention already on the commotion outside. Tahan walked out into the blinding sunlight. Ahote and the others were mounted, their horses dancing nervously. Ahote's hand was on his knife. "What is it?" Tahan asked in Comanche. "The white men." Ahote spat, pointing down the street toward the saloon. "They are animals." A crowd had gathered in front of the Golden Steer saloon. Men were laughing, whistling, and passing bottles around. At the center of the circle, standing on the raised wooden steps, was a man named Silas, a petty gambler who was known to owe Colton Briggs more money than he could count, and beside him stood a woman. Tahan handed the supplies to the youngest brave and walked toward the crowd. He told himself he was just assessing the threat, ensuring their path out of town was clear. But something in the pitch of the laughter drew him in. It was the sound of wolves circling a wounded doe. As he broke through the edge of the ring, he saw her. She could not have been more than 20 years old. Her dress was made of cheap calico, torn at the shoulder and stained with the dust of the road. Her hair, the color of dried walnut shells, hung in tangled waves around a face that bore the purple and yellow shadows of recent bruises. But it was her silence that struck Tahan like a physical blow. The crowd was screaming, shouting obscenities, throwing dirt at the hem of her skirt. Yet she did not flinch. She did not cry. She did not beg. She stood with her spine rigid, her hands bound loosely with a piece of rough rope in front of her. Her eyes were the color of the sky after a storm, a pale, piercing blue, and they were completely empty. It was not the emptiness of stupidity, but the emptiness of a room where the furniture had been burned to keep the occupant warm. She had retreated so far inside herself that the world could no longer touch her. "Look at her," Silas bellowed, sweating profusely, his eyes darting around the crowd. "She is strong back, wide hips, good for working the fields or warming the bed, and best of all, gentlemen, she is quiet, not a peep out of her since I corrected her manners last week." The crowd roared with laughter. $50, a voice shouted, "to pay off your debt to Mr. Briggs." "50, Silas wiped his forehead. "Mr. Briggs wants 500. I need serious bids here." Tahan felt a cold fury settle in his gut. He knew this practice existed. He had heard of men selling wives or daughters to settle debts, treating them no better than the cattle Briggs drove across the plains. But seeing it here, under the open sky, made the bile rise in his throat. $70, called out a man covered in coal dust. "The blacksmith. She got all her teeth." "Silas," another shouted. Silas grabbed the woman's jaw, forcing her mouth open roughly to show the crowd. "Sounds like $1. Look at that." The woman Eliza did not fight. She let her head be turned, her mouth inspected, her dignity stripped away layer by layer. She was a ghost, haunting her own body. "That is enough," a deep voice boomed. The crowd parted as Colton Briggs himself stepped down from the boardwalk of the hotel opposite the saloon. He was immaculate in his suit, a stark contrast to the filth of the street. He smoked a cigar, the smoke curling around his face. "Silas," Briggs said, his voice smooth and dangerous, "you are making a spectacle, and you are insulting me." "Mr. Briggs," Silas stammered, I am liquidating assets. To pay you, today, just like you said." "I said I wanted my money," Briggs said, walking closer, his boots crunching in the dirt. He stopped in front of Eliza, looking her up and down with a possessive sneer. "I did not say you could turn my town into a circus. Besides, $70, she is worth more than that to me as a lesson." Briggs reached out and trailed a finger down Eliza's cheek. She did not pull away, but Tahan saw a minute tremor run through her frame, like a ripple on a pond. She was a firebrand when she arrived, Briggs told the crowd, as if discussing a horse he had broken. Talk back. I thought she was better than her station. But silence. Silence is a virtue I admire. $100, a drunken cowboy yelled. Briggs turned, his face darkening. She is not for sale to you, filth. She goes to my ranch house. She can work off the dead in the kitchen. And the bunkhouse. One of Briggs's men stepped forward and grabbed the rope binding Eliza's wrists. Jerking her forward, she stumbled, her knees hitting the wooden steps hard. A gasp of pain escaped her lips, the first sound she had made, but she bit it back instantly. The cruelty of the motion, the casual way the man yanked her as if she were a dog, snapped something inside Tahan. For a moment, he was back on the ridge, watching his father fall. He was watching the treaties burn. He was seeing the strong taking what they wanted simply because they held the whip. If I do nothing, Tahan thought, his heart hammering against his ribs. I am no better than the man who pulls the rope. I am just another witness to the crime. He pushed past a ranch hand. Stop! The word was not shouted, but it carried the weight of a stone dropped into a deep well. The crowd turned. Silence rippled outward from Tahan. He stood alone in the circle, his three brothers watching from their horses with wide eyes. Briggs took the cigar from his mouth and laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Well now, the savage speaks English. You lost. Boy, the trading post is that way. Tahan ignored Briggs. He looked at Silas. You sell her to pay debt. Silas blinked, confused. Yeah, that is right. To the highest bidder. I bid, Tahan said. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Then laughter, nervous, incredulous laughter. You. Briggs stepped between Tahan and the woman. You do not have 2 nickels to rub together. Comanche, get back on your pony before I have the sheriff shoot it out from under you. Tahan reached into his tunic. He pulled out the bag of silver, what was left of it, and the heavy silver armband he wore, carved with the symbols of his ancestors. He tossed the bag to Silas. It landed with a heavy clink. Silver, Tahan said. And, he pointed to the horses where a Hote waited. The paint mare. She is young, strong, fast. Worth 3 of your plow horses. Silas caught the bag, weighing it greedily. He looked at the mare. It was a magnificent animal, far better than anything currently in the Rio Sombra stable. That is a fair bit of value, Silas mumbled, looking at Briggs with fear in his eyes. It covers the debt, Mr. Briggs, and interest. Briggs's face turned a shade of purple that matched the bruises on Eliza's face. You would sell a white woman to a redskin? Have you lost your mind? Silas. Business is business, Silas squeaked, backing away. You said you wanted the money. This is the money. She is white, someone in the crowd shouted. It ain't right. She is property, Tahan said coldly, using their own twisted logic against them. You sell. I bought it. That is the law of this town, is it not? He looked at Sheriff Daly, who had pushed his way to the front. Sheriff, is it the law? Daly looked at Briggs, then at the bag of silver in Silas's hand, and finally at Tahan. The sheriff was a hard man, but he adhered to the letter of the law when it suited him to avoid a bloodbath in the street, and he knew that if he let Briggs take the woman by force after a legitimate bid, the tenuous order of the town might collapse. The debt is cleared if the seller accepts, Daly said slowly, his hand resting on his gun. Silas, I accept, Silas yelled, scrambling to grab the reins of the mare that a Hote, understanding Tahan's signal with reluctant fury, brought forward. Briggs stepped forward, his hand going to the pearl-handled revolver at his hip. I will not stand for this. That woman belongs to me. Tahan did not flinch. He stepped past Briggs, moving into the man's personal space with a quiet lethality that made the cattle baron pause. Tahan approached Eliza. Up close, she smelled of fear and old soap. She looked up at him. For the first time, the emptiness in her blue eyes rippled. Confusion. Hope. It was impossible to tell. Tahan drew his knife. The crowd drew a sharp breath. Briggs's men reached for their guns. With a single, gentle motion, Tahan cut the rope binding her wrists. He sheathed the knife. He did not grab her arm. He did not pull her. He simply extended a hand, palm up. A question, an offer. "I go," Tahan said to her, his voice low and rough. "You stay. You die inside. You come. It is a hard life, but you are free." Eliza looked at the hand. It was large, scarred, and copper-skinned. It was the hand of the enemy, the boogeyman of every story she'd been told since childhood. Then she looked at Briggs, whose face was twisted in a mask of ownership and rage. She looked at the town that had watched her be dragged onto the steps and had done nothing but bid on her flesh. She made her choice. Without a sound, she placed her small, pale hand into Tahan's. A shock seemed to pass through the crowd. They could understand a savage stealing a woman. That fit their stories. They could not understand a woman choosing a savage. "Stop them," Briggs roared. "Sheriff, that is kidnapping. She is walking on her own 2 feet. "Colton," Daly said, stepping in front of Briggs. "And the debt is paid. Let them go. Unless you want to start a war right here on Main Street with 20 more Braves waiting in the canyon." It was a lie. There were no more Braves nearby, but it worked. Briggs hesitated, glancing at the hills. Tahan led Eliza to his stallion. He grasped her waist, his touch firm but impersonal, and lifted her onto the back of the saddle. She settled behind him, her arms hesitating for a moment before wrapping tentatively around his waist. She was trembling, a continuous vibration against his back. Tahan swung up into the saddle in front of her. He gathered the reins. He looked down at Briggs one last time. "We have a treaty," Tahan said, his voice carrying over the silent crowd. "I came in peace. I leave in peace. Do not follow." He kicked the stallion into a gallop. Ahote and the others fell beside him, flanking the couple as they thundered down the main street. Dust rose in a choking cloud behind them, obscuring the faces of the townsfolk. Back on the steps, Colton Briggs slammed his hat into the dirt. His face was vein-popping red. He pointed a shaking finger at the retreating cloud of dust. "This is not over," Briggs screamed, his voice cracking with fury. "He stole what is mine. That treaty is dead. I will burn every teepee in that canyon to get her back, I swear." As the buildings of Rio Sombra faded into the distance, giving way to the open, rolling sagebrush, Tahan did not look back. He could feel the warmth of the silent woman pressed against his spine. He had ridden into town for salt and flour. He was leaving with a storm that would change the shape of his life forever. The wind tore at them, wild and free. But for the first time in years, the path ahead was completely unknown. All Tahan knew was that the small hands clutching his tunic were holding on for dear life, and he would die before he let anyone break their grip. The sun was dipping low, painting the western sky in bruised shades of purple and crimson. By the time Tahan and the silent woman reached the canyon entrance, the ride had been long and quiet, 4 miles. The only sounds were the rhythmic beating of the hooves of the horses against the hardpan and the whistle of the wind through the buffalo grass. Tahan could feel the tension in the small body pressed behind him. She held onto his waist not with the embrace of a lover, but with the desperate grip of someone drowning who had found a piece of driftwood. He had tried to speak to her twice. Once, when they crossed the shallow ford of the Red River, he had pointed to the water and said the Comanche word for it. Then the English. She had watched his lips move, her blue eyes intense and unblinking, but she had offered no sound in return. Later, when they stopped to rest the horses, he had offered her dried venison. She took it with trembling hands, instead of eating immediately. She broke the strip in half and held the larger piece out to him. It was a simple gesture, a sharing of sustenance, but it confused Tahan. White people, in his experience, they did not share. He accepted the meat with a nod, and for a moment, the vast distance between their worlds seemed to shrink by a fraction of an inch. As they descended into the camp, the atmosphere shifted. The safe anonymity of the open plains vanished, replaced by the weight of 100 staring eyes. The camp was busy with the evening chores. Women were tending the fires. the smoke rising in thin gray columns. Children were chasing dogs between the lodges. But as Tahan rode in, the chatter died away. Heads turned. Hands stopped their work. The silence that followed them was heavy with suspicion. Ahote rode beside Tahan, his face dark. He had not spoken a word since they left Rio Sombra, but his anger radiated off him like heat from a dying coal. Tahan brought his stallion to a halt in front of his lodge. He slid down and reached up to help the woman. She hesitated, looking at the sea of copper faces surrounding her, faces painted with curiosity and hostility. Tahan kept his hand steady. "Come," he said softly. "You are safe." She slid down, her legs wobbly from the long ride. She stood close to the horse, using its bulk as a shield against the stares of the tribe. Elder Hato emerged from his lodge, leaning heavily on a willow staff. He squinted against the dying light, his gaze moving from Tahan to the white woman in the torn calico dress. "You went for salt and flour, grandson," Hato said, his voice dry as old leaves. "You return with a storm." "I bought her," Tahan said, his voice carrying clearly so that others could hear. "She was being sold like a mule. I paid the price. She is white," a woman's voice called out from the crowd. It was one of the mothers who had lost a son to the soldiers 2 winters ago. "She brings the blue coats. She brings death." Ahote dismounted and threw his reins to a young boy. He stomped over to where Hato stood. "Tahan is a fool," Ahote declared, pointing a thick finger at Eliza. "He gave away a war horse for this ghost. We should not keep her." Eliza shrank back, though her face remained impassive. She understood the tone, if not the words. "She has no one," Tahan said, stepping between Eliza and the crowd. "Her own people cast her out. She is under my protection." Hato looked at Eliza for a long time. He saw the bruises on her cheek, the way her hands shook despite her rigid posture. He saw the spirit of a frightened bird trapped in a cage of bones. "You have done a dangerous thing, Tahan," Hato said quietly. "To save a life is good, but to bring a white woman here, the army will not care that you paid silver. They will say you stole her. They will say you are a savage who took a prize." "Let them come," Ahote growled, his hand resting on his knife hilt. "If they want her, we can trade her. She is worth rifles, maybe land." Tahan turned on his friend, his eyes flashing. "She is not a good trade. Ahote, she is a person. I did not buy her to sell her again." Ahote spat on the ground. "You have been listening to their talk too much. You forget whose blood runs in your veins." "Enough," Hato commanded. He looked at Tahan. "She is here now. What is done, but she is your responsibility. Tahan, if she brings harm to the people, it will be on your head." Tahan nodded. "I accept this." He turned to Eliza. She was watching the exchange with wide eyes, tracking the emotions if not the language. He gestured to the entrance of his lodge. It was a modest structure, clean but empty since he lived alone. "Go," he said. "Sleep." She looked at the dark opening, then back at him. Slowly, she nodded and ducked inside. Tahan stood outside the flap, his arms crossed, defying anyone in the camp to challenge him. One by one, the onlookers drifted away, whispering into the twilight. The days that followed were a strange, uneasy truce. Eliza was like a shadow in the camp. She did not speak, not a single word. The women of the tribe, initially hostile, began to watch her with a mixture of suspicion and grudging respect. She did not sit idle. Without being asked, she picked up the rhythm of daily life. When Tahan's aunt, an old woman named Sauri, went to fetch water from the creek, Eliza took the heavy buffalo stomach container from her hands and carried it herself. When the other women sat scraping hides, Eliza watched for 10 minutes, then picked up a scraper and joined them. Her hands were soft and blistered easily at first, but she did not stop. She worked until her fingers were raw, wiping the sweat from her forehead with a forearm, her mouth set in a determined line. She was quick to learn. She learned how to grind the corn, how to dry the meat, how to check the moccasins for holes. She moved through the camp like a ghost, silent and efficient. The children were the first to break the barrier. A group of them had been playing a game with sticks and stones near the fire where Eliza was stirring a stew. They had been throwing pebbles at her skirt, testing her reaction. She had ignored them. Then, a small boy named Coco tripped and scraped his knee. He began to wail. Eliza abandoned the stew immediately. She knelt beside the boy. She did not speak, but she pulled a clean handkerchief from her pocket, one of the few possessions she had brought, and wiped the blood away. She spat on the cloth to clean the dirt, her touch gentle. The other children gathered around, silent now. Eliza smoothed the boy's hair. Then, seeing their attention, she smoothed a patch of sand in front of her. With a finger, she drew a picture. It was a horse, crude but recognizable. She pointed to the horse, then to the boy. Coco stopped crying. He pointed to the drawing. Puku, he said, the Comanche word for horse. Eliza nodded. She wiped the sand clean and drew a bird. Hoo-hoo, the children chorused. A small, genuine smile touched the corners of Eliza's mouth. It was gone in an instant, like a flash of lightning. But Tahan, watching from the edge of the clearing, saw it. It was the first time he had seen her look like something other than a victim. But the nights were harder. Tahan slept near the entrance of the lodge, giving her the softer furs at the back. Every night, the demons of her past came to visit. He would hear her gasping for air, the sound of a scream caught in a throat that had forgotten how to make noise. He would hear the rustle of the robes as she thrashed, fighting off invisible hands. One night, the moon was full and bright, casting long shadows into the lodge. Tahan woke to the sound of a sharp intake of breath. Eliza was sitting bolt upright, her eyes wide and unseeing. Her hands clutching the neck of her dress so tightly, her knuckles were white. She was shaking violently. "Eliza!" Tahan whispered, keeping his voice low to not startle her further. She flinched as if he had struck her. She scrambled backward, pressing herself against the hide wall of the lodge, pulling her knees to her chest. She looked at him with terror, unable to distinguish him from the men who had hurt her before. Tahan did not move closer. He stayed where he was, giving her space. "It is Tahan," he said gently. "You are safe. No one is here." He saw her chest heaving. Slowly, very slowly. Recognition dawned in her eyes. The terror receded, replaced by a crushing shame. She buried her face in her knees. He wanted to comfort her, to tell her that she did not need to be afraid of him. But he knew words were of little use against such deep scars. So he did the only thing he could think of. He began to sing. It was a low, rhythmic chant, a song his mother had sung to him when the thunder shook the ground. It had no words that she would understand, just a melody of comfort and protection. Eliza stopped shaking. She lifted her head slightly, listening to the deep rumble of his voice in the dark. Eventually, her breathing evened out. She lay back down, pulling the furs up to her chin, her eyes watching him until sleep finally claimed her again. But the peace of the camp was as fragile as Elder Hato had warned. 4 days after their return, the sentries signaled from the ridge. Riders were approaching. Not traders, soldiers. The camp erupted into organized chaos. Mothers gathered children into the lodges. Warriors grabbed their rifles and bows, moving to the defensive positions along the canyon rim. Tahan felt a cold stone settle in his stomach. He knew why they were here. He went to his lodge. Eliza was standing there, her face pale. She knew what the commotion meant. "Stay inside," Tahan told her. "Do not come out unless I call you." He grabbed his Winchester and stepped out to join Hato and the other men in the center of the camp. The riders appeared at the canyon mouth. There were 12 of them. Blue coats, yellow bandanas, the dust of the trail coating their horses. They rode under a flag of truce, but their hands were near their carbines. Leading them was a lieutenant with a waxed mustache and a face that looked like it had been carved from sour apple wood. Beside him was a civilian interpreter. They halted 10 yards from where Hato and Tahan stood. "I seek the chief of this band," the lieutenant barked. "I am Hato," the elders said, speaking English with dignity. "Why do you ride into our home with guns ready?" "We have reports of a crime," the lieutenant said, his eyes scanning the faces of the warriors. "A white woman, kidnapped from the town of Rio Sombra 4 days ago, by a buck riding a paint stallion." His eyes landed on Tahan. "That man," the lieutenant pointed a gloved finger. "And I see the horse over there. No kidnap," Tahan said, stepping forward. "I trade. I pay silver. I pay for the horse. She came with me." "That is not the story, mister. Colton Briggs tells," the lieutenant sneered. "He says you and a war party rode in, threatened the town, and dragged his fiancée away." Fiancée? Tahan felt a surge of disgust. "He sold her, like a cow." "I am not here to debate with you," the lieutenant snapped. "I am here to retrieve the woman. Produce her, now, or I will return with the entire squadron and burn this place to the ground." Hato looked at Tahan. The old man's eyes were sad. "Bring her, Tahan. Let her speak." Tahan turned to the lodge. He did not have to call. Eliza stepped out. She had combed her hair. She wore the Comanche dress Sari had given her, the buckskin soft against her skin. But she still looked unmistakably white. The sun caught the blue of her eyes. A murmur went through the soldiers. "Miss," the lieutenant said, his voice softening slightly, assuming the role of the savior. "I am Lieutenant Miller, United States Cavalry. You are safe now. We are here to take you home." Eliza stood beside Tahan. She looked at the lieutenant. She looked at the soldiers, with their sabers and their flags. "Did this man force you to come here?" Lieutenant Miller asked. "Did he hurt you?" "Just nod. Miss, we will handle the rest." The silence stretched out. The wind whistled through the canyon. Every ear was strained to hear her response. Ahote had an arrow knocked on his string, hidden behind a teepee. Eliza looked at Tahan. She saw the tension in his jaw, the way he stood ready to die to keep her from being taken. She looked at the women of the tribe, who were watching her with fear, knowing that her words could bring death to their children. Then she looked back at the lieutenant. She did not nod. She did not shake her head. She simply stared at him with that same unnerving, empty intensity she had shown in the town. "Miss..." Miller stepped his horse closer. "You do not have to be afraid. We can protect you." Eliza took a step back, not toward the soldiers, toward Tahan. She reached out and took hold of Tahan's sleeve, her grip firm. It was a clear rejection. Miller's face flushed red. "She is in shock," he muttered to the interpreter. "She has been bewitched or drugged." "She chooses," Tahan said firmly. "She will stay." "This is not over," Miller spat, wheeling his horse around. "You cannot keep a white woman in a savage camp. The colonel will hear of this. Briggs will hear of this." He glared at Tahan. "You just bought yourself a war, boy." The soldiers turned and galloped out of the camp, the dust of their departure coating the drying meat and the silent people. That night, the mood in the camp was grim. The threat hung over them like a thunderhead. Some of the warriors were drinking trade whiskey they had hidden away, their fear turning into aggression. Tahan sat outside his lodge, cleaning his rifle. He knew they would come back. It was only a matter of time. Suddenly, a shadow fell over him. It was Stone Dog, a warrior known for his bad temper and love of whiskey. He stumbled toward the lodge entrance, his eyes blurry. "Where is the white girl?" Stone Dog slurred. "If she brings war, she should be good for something else first." Tahan stood up. He was smaller than Stone Dog, but he was sober. "Go home. Stone Dog, you're drunk." "She is a white whore." Stone Dog lunged for the flap. "I want to see..." Tahan moved with the speed of a striking snake. He caught Stone Dog by the throat and shoved him backward. Stone Dog tripped and fell into the dirt. He scrambled up, drawing his knife. "I will cut you, Tahan!" "Stop!" Ahote stepped out of the shadows. He held a war club. He looked at Stone Dog with disdain. "You shame us. Fight the bluecoats, not your brother. Go sleep." Stone Dog looked from Ahote to Tahan, then spat and sheathed his knife. He staggered away into the darkness. Tahan nodded to Ahote. "Thank you." "I did not do it for her," Ahote said coldly. I did it because we need every warrior for the fight she has brought us." He turned and left. Tahan sat back down, his heart racing. He felt a light touch on his shoulder. Eliza was standing there. She had heard everything. She held a thick wool blanket in her hands. The night air was biting cold, dropping below freezing. Tahan was shivering in his light shirt. She unfolded the blanket and draped it over his shoulders. Her fingers brushed his neck, warm and soft. She did not retreat inside immediately. She sat down next to him on the hard earth, wrapping her own shawl tighter around herself. They sat there in the darkness, shoulder to shoulder, watching the stars wheel overhead. He was a Comanche warrior, and she was a mute girl with a shattered past. They had no common language, no shared history, but in the silence, with the threat of the world closing in around them, Tahan felt a strange peace settle over him. He was not alone, and for the first time since his father died, he felt he had something worth fighting for that was not just memory, but life itself. 30 miles away, in the smoky office of the Fort Sill commander, Colton Briggs poured a glass of brandy for Major Wilkins. "The lieutenant says the girl is broken," Briggs said smoothly, swirling the amber liquid. "Says she would not speak, likely terrified out of her mind, Stockholm Syndrome, or whatever the doctors call it when a captive bonds with the captor to survive." Major Wilkins, a man with a soft belly and a love for fine things his army could not afford, nodded sympathetically. "A tragedy, Mr. Briggs," but without a clear statement from her. "Major." Briggs leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Does it matter what a traumatized girl says? What matters is that a savage walked into a civilized town and took a white woman. If we let that stand, no woman on the frontier is safe. The settlers panicked. They are demanding action." He slid a heavy leather pouch across the desk. It made a dull thud. "I have investors coming from the east next month," Briggs continued. "Railroad men. They need to know this territory is secure. They need to know the army is in control. If you were to rescue this poor girl, and in the process, perhaps push those savages back to the reservation boundaries where they belong, well, the gratitude of the territory would be significant." Wilkins fingered the pouch. He looked at the map on the wall, at the prime grazing land currently occupied by the Quahati Band. "We would need a provocation," Wilkins said softly. "Something more than just the girl, something that forces my hand." Briggs smiled, a predator scenting blood. "Leave that to me. Major, by the time the moon is full again, you will have your provocation, and I will have my land." The creek ran clear and cold over smooth stones, a ribbon of life winding through the dry scrub of the plains. It was a quiet place, hidden from the main camp by a rise of cottonwood trees. Tahan sat on the bank, repairing a tear in his moccasin with an awl made of bone and sinew. Eliza sat a few feet away, washing the dust from her face. It had been a week since the soldiers had ridden away, but the air still felt thick with impending violence. Tahan pulled the sinew tight, his brow furrowed. He was thinking of his father again, of the day the peace talks turned into a slaughter. "He believed them," Tahan said, his voice breaking the silence. He did not look at Eliza, but he spoke to her. "My father." He thought that if he spoke with honor, they would answer with honor. He walked out with his chest open. When the bullet struck him, he did not look angry. He looked surprised. Tahan paused, the memory sharp as a knife in his gut. "I watched him die from the ridge. I held a bow, but I was too far away. I could do nothing. Sometimes I feel I am still on that ridge, watching the people I love walk into traps I cannot stop." He stabbed the awl into the leather, frustration boiling over. "I brought you here to save you, but maybe I just brought you to a different kind of dying." The splashing of water stopped. Tahan felt eyes on him. He turned to find Eliza watching him. Her face was wet, water droplets clinging to her eyelashes. The usual emptiness in her eyes had receded, replaced by a fierce, sorrowful light. Her lips parted, her throat worked, muscles straining against a dam of silence that had held for months. The sound was a rasp, like dry leaves crushing together. Tahan froze, He stared at her, hardly daring to breathe. He knew, Eliza whispered. Her voice was hoarse, cracking with disuse, but the words were distinct. He knew you, loved him. Tahan dropped the moccasin. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. You speak, he breathed. Eliza lowered her gaze to her hands, which were clasped white-knuckled in her lap. I can, she murmured. I chose not to. Tahan moved closer, moving on his knees until he was just a foot away. Why? Because words, she said, her voice gaining a fraction more strength, were the only things I had left that were mine. They took my home, they took my name, they took my body, but they could not take my voice if I did not give it to them. That night, inside the lodge, the fire burned low, casting dancing shadows on the buffalo hide walls. The dam had broken, and the story of Eliza poured out. It came in fragments, disjointed and painful, whispered into the semi-darkness. She told him of a mother she barely remembered and a father who loved whiskey more than his own flesh. She told him of the night he lost a game of poker to a man who worked for Colton Briggs, and how he had settled the debt with the deed to his daughter. Briggs came for me the next day, Eliza said, staring into the embers. She sat with her knees pulled to her chest. He dragged me to his ranch. He said I was to be his wife, but he treated me like a dog that needed training. Tahan listened, his hand resting on the hilt of his knife, his knuckles white. He wanted to drive back to Rio Sombra and burn it to ash. He hit me when I cried, she continued. He locked me in the cellar when I begged to go home. And one night, he came to my room. He was drunk. He said it was time I learned my duties. She shuddered, a violent tremor that shook her small frame. I fought him. I bit his hand. He struck me so hard I saw black. He did not finish what he started that night because he passed out. But the next morning, he told me I was damaged goods. He said I was too wild to be a wife, so he would sell me to someone who could break me properly. That was when I stopped speaking. I decided I would never give a man the satisfaction of hearing me scream again. She looked up at Tahan, tears tracking silently down her cheeks. I am broken. Tahan, I am dirty. Briggs touched me with his hands. I have been sold on a street corner. I am not worthy of this kindness. I am not worthy of a warrior. Tahan reached out. For the first time, he touched her face, his thumb brushing away a tear. His skin was rough, but his touch was as gentle as the morning breeze. Look at me, he commanded softly. She met his gaze. You are not broken. Tahan said firmly, a pot is broken when it can no longer hold water. You hold a spirit stronger than any man I know. You survived. That is not dirt. Eliza, that is armor. Briggs is the one who is small. He is the one who is empty. But I bring you danger, she whispered. I am a curse. You are not a curse, Tahan said. You are the lightning that woke me up. The next morning, the reality of their situation arrived with a rider from the north. It was a young scout, his horse lathered in sweat. He brought news to Elder Hato, but his eyes kept darting to Tahan's lodge. Tahan met Hato outside. The old man looked grave. The bluecoats are gathering at the fort, Hato said. Briggs has hired gunmen, 20 of them. They say they come to rescue the white woman, but they bring wagons for supplies. They plan to stay. They want the land. Tahan, she is just the key that opens the door. Tahan looked at the camp. He saw children playing. He saw his Aunt Sauri grinding corn. If the soldiers came here, this valley would become a graveyard. He made his decision instantly. I will take her, Tahan said. We will leave the camp. Where will you go? Hato asked. The winter is coming. Away from the people. Tahan replied. If we are not here, Briggs has no excuse to attack the tribe. I will draw them into the Badlands. I will lead them on a chase they will not forget. Hato nodded slowly. He placed a hand on Tahan's shoulder. You are a true chief, my son, even without the feathers. Eliza was waiting inside. She had heard. She was already packing the few things they had: the blanket, the knife, the remaining dried meat. We go, she asked. It was a statement, not a question. She understood. She would not let these people bleed for her. "We go," Tahan said. They rode out within the hour, heading west toward the Caprock Escarpment, a land of red earth and little water. They took no spare horses, traveling light and fast. The wilderness tested them immediately. The high plains were a merciless teacher. On the second day, the wind shifted, bringing a wall of dust that turned the sky a bruised yellow. The sandstorm hit with the force of a physical blow, stinging their skin and blinding the horses. Tahan led them to the lee of a large boulder formation. He pulled the heavy buffalo robe over both of them and the heads of the horses. For 6 hours, they huddled in the dark, suffocating heat, listening to the wind scream like a banshee. Eliza did not panic. She held a wet cloth over the nose of Tahan's stallion, soothing the terrified animal while Tahan held the mare. When the wind died, they emerged into a changed landscape. The trail was gone. The waterholes Tahan knew were buried. That night, wolves tracked them. Tahan heard their yips echoing off the canyon walls. He kept a fire burning high, his rifle across his knees. Eliza did not hide behind him. She sat with a sturdy branch she had sharpened into a spear, her eyes scanning the darkness. "I am not afraid," she told him, her voice steady. "Wolves are honest. They kill to eat. Men kill for pleasure." Tahan looked at her, seeing the firelight dance in her eyes. She was shedding the skin of the victim with every mile they put between them and the town. She was becoming something new, something forged in iron. On the fourth night, the heavens opened. It was a cold, driving rain that soaked through their buckskins in minutes. The temperature plummeted. They were high in the foothills now, where the air was thin and sharp. Tahan found a shallow cave, barely more than an indentation in the limestone cliff. They huddled inside, shivering violently. The wood they had gathered was too wet to burn. The darkness was absolute, save for the occasional flash of lightning that illuminated the sheet of rain falling like a curtain in front of them. "We must share warmth," Tahan said, his teeth chattering, "or the cold will take us." He spread the dry side of the buffalo robe on the stone floor. He sat down and opened his arms. Eliza hesitated for only a heartbeat. She crawled into the space between his legs, pressing her back against his chest. He wrapped the ends of the robe around them both, creating a cocoon. For a long time, they just sat there, shaking. Tahan rubbed her arms briskly, trying to generate heat. He could feel the curve of her spine, the softness of her hair against his cheek. He smelled the rain and the sage and the woman. Slowly, the shivering stopped. A different kind of heat began to rise. Eliza turned in his arms. In the flash of lightning, he saw her face. It was open, vulnerable, but searching. She reached up and traced the line of his jaw. "Tahan," she whispered. "I am here," he answered. "I want." She paused, searching for the words. "I want to know what it is to be touched by a man who does not want to break me. I want to know what it is to be touched with care." She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. It was tentative at first, a question. Tahan froze, terrified of frightening her, terrified of his own strength. But then he kissed her back. He kissed her with all the restraint he possessed, with a tenderness that belied the warrior's hands that held her. The kiss deepened. It was the taste of rain and desire. Eliza made a small sound in her throat, not of fear, but of want. She pulled him closer. "Make me new," she whispered against his mouth. Tahan laid her back on the robe. He moved slowly, letting her set the pace. Every touch was a request for permission, every movement a promise of safety. When he removed her wet dress, he did it with the reverence of a man uncovering a holy relic. He traced the bruises that were fading on her skin, kissing them one by one, as if his lips could erase the memory of the violence that had put them there. The storm raged outside, tearing at the trees and flooding the washes. But inside the small cave, in the circle of the buffalo robe, there was only the sound of their breathing and the soft friction of skin on skin. They made love not with the frantic energy of lust, but with a slow, deliberate intensity. For Eliza, it was a reclamation. With every gentle stroke of Tahan's hand, with every moment he paused to look into her eyes and ensure she was with him, she took back a piece of herself that Briggs had tried to steal. She was not a thing to be sold. She was a woman, alive and burning. For Tahan, it was a surrender. He had spent his life fighting the soldiers, fighting the hunger, fighting the anger. Here, in her arms, he laid down his war. He found a peace that no treaty could ever provide. When the storm passed and the dawn broke gray and misty, they were still intertwined, asleep under the robe. Tahan woke first. He watched the light steal across Eliza's face. She looked younger in her sleep. The lines of tension smoothed away. He sat up carefully and reached into his medicine pouch. He pulled out a single, perfect eagle feather, white with a black tip. He also took a strip of soft leather. Eliza stirred. She opened her eyes, and a slow smile spread across her face. It was the first time she had smiled at him upon waking. "Morning," she murmured. "Morning," Tahan said. He held up the feather. "In my tribe, when a man and a woman choose to walk the same path, we do not sign papers. We braid our lives together." He moved behind her, gently. He gathered a lock of her hair at the temple. He began to braid it, weaving the leather strip and the quill of the eagle feather into the plait. It was a symbol of protection, of honor, declaring to any Comanche who saw her that she was the wife of a warrior. Eliza sat very still, letting him work. When he was finished, she reached up and touched the feather. "I have nothing of value to give," she said softly. "No feathers, no horses." She reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a small object. It was a ring, made of cheap brass with a tiny, chipped glass stone. "It was my mother's," she said. "She hid it from my father so he would not sell it for drink. It is the only thing I have from her. It is not gold, but—" She took Tahan's hand. The ring was too small for his finger, so she tied it to the leather thong around his neck, where it rested against his chest. "It is a promise," she said. "In my world, this means forever." Tahan covered her hand with his. "Two worlds," he said. "One path." They packed their meager camp in silence, a new understanding flowing between them. They were no longer just fugitives running from a threat. They were a unit, a family. "We go to the Canyon of the Spirits," Tahan said as they mounted. "It is a day's ride. The walls are high. There is only one way in. If they follow us, we will make our stand there." "I am ready," Eliza said. She checked the load in the revolver Tahan had given her. She did not handle it like a frightened girl anymore. She handled it like a woman who had something to defend. They rode hard, pushing the horses. By late afternoon, they reached the canyon. It was a narrow slash in the earth, red rock towering 500 feet on either side. Tahan led them to a high shelf that offered cover and a commanding view of the entrance. He gathered dry brush and green sage. "I must signal a hota," he explained. "Not to bring them into the fight, but to tell them we are safe for now, and to tell them to move the women and children deep into the hills." He lit the fire, using his blanket to puff 3 distinct columns of white smoke into the blue sky. It was a risk it marked their location, but Tahan knew Briggs would find them anyway. He wanted Briggs to come here, away from the village, but Briggs was closer than Tahan thought. 20 miles to the east, a man in a dusty duster coat dismounted from his horse. He was a tracker, a man who hunted men for money. He knelt by a thorn bush. Snagged on a cruel barb was a small strip of calico fabric. The pattern was faded flowers. The tracker smiled, revealing yellow teeth. He stood up and turned to the group of men waiting on horseback. There were 20 of them, heavily armed. Colton Briggs sat at the front, his face a mask of impatience. "Well," Briggs demanded. "Got him, Mr. Briggs," the tracker said, holding up the fabric. "She snagged her dress. They are heading for the Box Canyon, the one the Indians call Spirit Canyon." Briggs spurred his horse forward, looking at the distant smoke signal rising against the sky. His eyes were cold and dead. "They are trapped," Briggs said with grim satisfaction. No back door in that canyon. We have got them. He pulled his rifle from its scabbard and checked the action. Ride hard, boys, Briggs shouted to his mercenaries. $500 to the man who brings me the girl, and $1,000 to the man who brings me the Comanche's scalp. He looked at the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set, turning the clouds the color of blood. We finish this tonight, Briggs whispered to himself. And tomorrow, the land is mine. The red walls of Spirit Canyon rose 500 feet toward the sky, creating a narrow throat of stone where the shadows stretched long and deep, even at midday. The air was still, heavy with the scent of pine resin and the metallic tang of ozone from the gathering clouds above. It was a place of ghosts, a place where the Comanche believed the wind carried the voices of the ancestors. Tahan crouched behind a natural breastwork of fallen boulders on the high western shelf. His Winchester rested on the rock, the barrel cold against his cheek. Below him, the canyon floor was a dry wash of gravel and sand, a killing ground for anyone foolish enough to enter without permission. Beside him, Eliza worked with focused intensity. She was no longer the trembling girl on the saloon steps. She wore her Comanche buckskins as if she had been born to them, her hair braided with the single eagle feather Tahan had given her. She was arranging piles of fist-sized stones and checking the tension on the bow Tahan had taught her to hold. She could not pull it with the strength of a warrior, but at close range, she could be dangerous. They are close, Tahan said, his voice a low rumble. He did not need to see them to know. The birds had stopped singing in the lower brush. The rhythm of the canyon had changed. I am ready, Eliza said. Her voice was still raspy, a tool she was relearning how to use, but it was steady. Remember, Tahan instructed, his eyes never leaving the bend in the canyon floor. We do not fire to kill the bluecoats if we can help it. If we kill soldiers, the army will never stop hunting the people. We aim for the horses. We aim for the ground. We make them turn back. And Briggs? Eliza asked. Tahan looked at her. His dark eyes were hard. If Briggs shows his head, he is mine. The sound of shod hooves on stone echoed off the canyon walls, magnifying the approach of the riders until it sounded like an avalanche. Then they appeared around the bend. Colton Briggs rode in the lead, sitting heavy on a bay gelding. He wore a long duster coat and a hat pulled low over his eyes. Flanking him were 20 hired gunmen, men with hard faces and loose morals, the kind of men who drifted from territory to territory, leaving shallow graves behind them. Behind the mercenaries rode a detachment of United States cavalry. There were 30 of them, their brass buttons dull in the overcast light, their carbines resting on their thighs. Leading them was a captain with gray whiskers and a face etched with the weariness of too many years on the frontier. This was Captain Reynolds, a man known for being strict but not cruel, a soldier who followed orders rather than passions. Briggs raised a hand, halting the column in the center of the wash. Directly below Tahan's position, "Come out, Tahan!" Briggs bellowed. His voice bounced off the rock walls, distorted and ugly. "I know you are up there. You have nowhere left to run." Tahan remained motionless. He signaled Eliza to stay low. "Captain," Briggs turned to the officer, "you see, they are hiding like rats." "That proves his guilt. He kidnapped my fiancée, murdered her father, and now he is dragging her through the dirt." Captain Reynolds looked up at the cliffs, scanning the rocks with narrowed eyes. "We do not know they are here yet, Mr. Briggs, and I will not order my men to fire blindly into a box canyon. That is a good way to get massacred. I have a tracker who says otherwise." Briggs spat. He looked back up. "Eliza, can you hear me? Girl, it is Colton. I have come to save you from this savage. Come down now, and all is forgiven." Eliza stiffened beside Tahan. Her hand went to the revolver at her belt. "He lies," she whispered. "I know," Tahan said. Tahan rose slowly from behind the rocks. He held his rifle in one hand, held high over his head, not in a firing position, but in a gesture of presence. "I am here, Briggs," Tahan called out. His voice was calm, contrasting sharply with the rancher's shouting. A dozen rifles among the mercenaries instantly snapped up. aiming at Tahan's chest. "Hold fire!" Captain Reynolds shouted. "I want to talk to him." The captain spurred his horse forward a few paces. "I am Captain Reynolds of the 4th Cavalry. We have a warrant for your arrest. Tahan for the abduction of a white woman and the violation of the territorial treaty. Send the woman down. Surrender your weapons, and you will receive a military trial." "There was no abduction," Tahan replied. "She came of her own will. She is my wife by the laws of the earth and sky." "She is a white woman," Briggs screamed, his face turning a mottled red. "She does not know what she is doing. You brainwashed her. You drugged her captain. Shoot him." "He is admitting to the crime." "The only crime," Tahan shouted back, "was the sale of a human being on the streets of Rio Sombra. Ask him, Captain, ask him how much he paid for her father's debt." Briggs roared, an incoherent sound of rage. He snatched a Winchester from his saddle scabbard. "Kill him $500 to the man who drops him." "Belay that order," Captain Reynolds barked, but it was too late. The mercenaries were not soldiers. They were paid by Briggs, and the promise of gold was louder than military discipline. 3 of the gunmen fired. The bullets chipped the rock inches from Tahan's face, sending razor-sharp shards of stone into his cheek. He dropped back behind cover as the canyon erupted in gunfire. "Now!" Tahan yelled to Eliza. Eliza shoved a large boulder they had balanced on the edge. It crashed down, triggering a small slide of loose scree and rocks. The debris rained down on the canyon floor, not hitting the men, but spooking the horses. The animals reared and screamed, breaking the formation. Tahan popped up and fired 3 rapid shots. He aimed for the dirt in front of the mercenaries' horses. The impacts kicked up geysers of dust, throwing the line into further chaos. "Defensive positions," Reynolds ordered his troops, who scrambled to dismount and find cover behind the scattered rocks on the canyon floor. The soldiers began to return fire, their discipline turning the skirmish into a suppressed battle. The air filled with the whine of ricochets and the smell of black powder smoke. Tahan moved along the ridge, firing and moving, making it seem as though there were 10 warriors instead of 1. Eliza stayed low, using her bow to launch arrows high into the air. They fell in steep arcs, not aiming to kill, but to keep the attackers pinned down. "Flank him!" Briggs screamed, firing wildly at the cliffs. "Get up the scree slope." 2 mercenaries tried to scramble up the steep incline to the left. Tahan saw them. He stood up to take careful aim at the rock face above them, intending to bring down more debris to block their path. It was a mistake. A marksman among the soldiers, seeing a target silhouette against the sky, fired. The bullet caught Tahan in the left shoulder. The impact spun him around like a rag doll. He dropped his rifle and fell hard onto the sandstone shelf, a spray of bright red blood painting the rock. "Tahan!" Eliza screamed. She scrambled over to him, ignoring the bullets that whizzed past like angry hornets. He was conscious, but his face was gray with shock. The heavy-caliber slug had torn through the muscle of his shoulder. He tried to rise, but his arm hung uselessly, and the pain made his vision swim. "Go!" Tahan gasped, clutching the wound. "Hide in the cave at the back. They will come up now." "No," Eliza said, her hands pressing hard on his wound to staunch the flow. "I am not leaving you." Below, a cheer went up from Briggs's men. "He is hit. I saw him go down." "Push forward," Briggs yelled. "Finish it." Suddenly, a war cry echoed from the canyon rim on the opposite side. A Hote appeared on the high skyline, silhouetted against the storm clouds. With him were 5 other Comanche warriors. They had ignored Tahan's smoke signal to stay away. They had come to save their brother. A Hote raised his rifle and fired. A mercenary on the canyon floor crumpled, clutching his leg. "Comanche war party," Reynolds shouted. "Company, volley fire on the east rim, ready aim." The situation had spiraled out of control. What was a standoff was about to become a massacre. If the soldiers opened up with organized volley fire on a Hote and his small band, they would be wiped out. And if a Hote's men started killing soldiers, the entire might of the United States Army would descend on the village within the week. Eliza looked at Tahan, who was drifting toward unconsciousness. She looked at a Hote on the ridge, preparing to die for a fight he did not understand. She looked down at the men who wanted to kill the only person who had ever treated her with kindness. The silence that had been her shield for so long was now her enemy. If she stayed hidden, everyone she loved would die. She took a deep breath. It felt like inhaling fire. She stood up. She did not crouch. She did not hide. She walked to the very edge of the precipice, where she was fully visible to every man in the canyon below. She untied the scarf from her neck and let it fall, the wind whipping her hair and dress around her. She raised both empty hands high into the air. "Stop!" The word was a scream, torn from the bottom of her lungs. It was raw, piercing, and undeniably female. It cut through the noise of the gunfire like a knife. On the canyon floor, heads turned up, the soldiers lowered their carbines. The mercenaries paused, confused. Even a Hote on the opposite rim held his fire, staring at the woman standing alone on the ledge. "Cease fire!" Captain Reynolds bellowed, sensing a change in the dynamic. "Hold your fire!" The shooting died away, replaced by the heavy breathing of men and horses and the low rumble of thunder. Eliza stood tall. Her legs were shaking, but she locked her knees. She looked down at the sea of upturned faces. She found Captain Reynolds. "I am Eliza," she shouted. Her voice echoed off the walls, raspy and strange, but loud. "I am the woman you say was stolen." Briggs rode his horse forward, his face twisted. "Do not listen to her. She is mad. The Indian has tortured her mind. He lies." Eliza pointed a finger directly at Briggs. "Colton Briggs is a liar and a thief." She turned her gaze to the captain. "I was not kidnapped. I was sold. My father gambled me away to this man's foreman. Briggs held me prisoner in his house. He beat me. He tried to force himself on me. And when I fought back, he sold me on the street in front of the saloon to pay a debt." A murmur went through the ranks of the soldiers. This was not the story of a damsel in distress. This was a specific, horrifying accusation. "She is lying." Briggs shrieked, looking around at his men, seeing the doubt in their eyes. "She is a whore! She slept with the savage!" "I chose him!" Eliza's voice cracked, but she pushed through. "Tahan paid for me when no one else would help. He gave everything he had to save me from you. He has never hurt me. He gave me my voice back." She looked at the soldiers. "You wear the uniform of the law. Is it the law to buy women? Is it the law to kill men who keep the peace treaties just because you want their land?" Captain Reynolds looked at Briggs. The disgust on the officer's face was undisguised. "Is this true? Mr. Briggs, did you sell this woman?" "It is my property," Briggs yelled, losing his composure entirely. "It is my business what I do with my property. That land is mine. That woman is mine." "I am no one's property," Eliza screamed back. "I am a free woman, and I accuse you, Colton Briggs, of kidnapping, of slavery, and of murder." The sky above cracked open. A jagged bolt of lightning struck the rim of the canyon, followed instantly by a deafening boom of thunder. The wind howled down the narrow throat of rock, kicking up dust. Briggs looked around. He saw the soldiers backing away from him. He saw his own mercenaries looking uneasy. They were killers, but even they had lines they preferred not to cross when the army was watching. He saw his empire crumbling. The narrative he had built the civilized man against the savage had been shattered by the truth of the woman he had tried to silence. His face contorted into a mask of pure, animalistic hate. If he could not own her, and if he could not sell her, he would destroy her. "You ungrateful witch!" Briggs hissed. He raised his Winchester, not at Tahan, but directly at Eliza. "Go to hell! Drop the weapon!" Captain Reynolds shouted, reaching for his own sidearm. But Briggs did not listen. He was beyond reason. He was a man who had been told no for the first time in his life, and his answer was violence. His finger tightened on the trigger. Eliza saw the barrel rise. She saw the black eye of death looking at her. Time seemed to slow down. She did not freeze. She did not scream. Her hand moved. It was a motion Tahan had taught her, practiced over and over with an empty gun until her hands were blistered. Smooth as fast. He had told her, "Do not think, just do." She drew the heavy revolver from her belt. She did not aim with one eye closed like a marksman. She pointed with her body. with her intent, with her rage. Briggs fired. His shot went wide, chipping the rock near her foot. Thrown off by his own shaking rage, Eliza fired. The report of the heavy Colt 45 was deeper than the crack of the rifles. On the canyon floor, Colton Briggs jerked violently backward. The bullet struck him square in the chest, punching through the expensive fabric of his duster and shattering his sternum. He flew off the back of his horse, landing in the dirt with a heavy thud. His horse reared and bolted. Briggs lay on his back, staring up at the slit of storm-tossed sky. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The man who had silenced her was now silenced forever. The canyon fell into a profound, ringing silence. The wind died down for a heartbeat. Eliza stood on the ledge, the smoking gun in her hand lowered to her side. She did not look triumphant. She looked tragic and tall, like a statue carved from the mountain itself. Ahote and his warriors lowered their weapons, staring in awe. The soldiers sat frozen in their saddles. Captain Reynolds slowly holstered his pistol. He looked at the body of Briggs, then up at Eliza. He saw the blood on her hands from Tahan's wound. He saw the fierce protectiveness in her stance. He made his decision. "Company," Reynolds barked, his voice breaking the spell. "Lower weapons!" He rode his horse forward until he was standing over Briggs' body. He looked down, verifying the death, then looked back up at the ledge. "Mrs. Tahan," Reynolds called out, using the title with a deliberate weight. "Is your husband alive?" "He is wounded," Eliza replied, her voice shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. "He needs a doctor," Reynolds nodded. He turned to his men. "Sergeant, bring the medical kit, and bring a stretcher." "Sir," the sergeant asked, confused. "Are we arresting them?" Reynolds looked at the mercenaries, who were already backing their horses away, sensing that their paycheck was dead in the dirt. "Mr. Briggs assaulted a civilian and attempted murder in the presence of United States officers," Reynolds stated loudly. "For the record, the woman acted in self-defense. As for the Comanche, they were defending their lives against an unlawful posse." He looked back at Eliza. "Bring him down, ma'am, under a flag of truce. My surgeon will look at that shoulder." Eliza sank to her knees. The strength went out of her legs. She dropped the gun and turned back to Tahan. He was conscious. He had seen it all. His eyes were filled with a mixture of pain and overwhelming pride. "You spoke," Tahan whispered, his voice weak but smiling. "You spoke loud." Eliza pressed her forehead against his good shoulder, sobbing dry, racking sobs. I had to make them see." "They saw," Tahan said, reaching up with his good hand to stroke her hair. "The whole world saw." Above them, the clouds finally burst. The rain came down in a torrent, washing the dust from the air and the blood from the rocks. It washed over the body of Colton Briggs, turning the dirt around him into mud. It washed over the soldiers and the warriors, who watched each other through the curtain of water, not as enemies for this one moment, but as witnesses to something they would tell their grandchildren about. The silent bride had spoken, and her voice had shaken the mountains. The rain that had washed the canyon clean finally slowed to a drizzle, leaving the red rock glistening and the air smelling of wet sage and iron. In the aftermath of the violence, a strange, fragile silence descended upon Spirit Canyon. It was not the silence of holding one's breath before a strike, but the silence of exhaustion. On the flat stone shelf where Tahan had fallen, the lines of battle had dissolved into the immediate necessity of survival. Ahote knelt beside his brother, his hands, usually so quick to reach for a weapon, now pressing a wad of clean cloth against Tahan's shoulder. The Comanche warrior looked up as heavy boots crunched on the gravel. Captain Reynolds stood there, accompanied by the regimental surgeon, a man named Dr. Aris with spectacles misted by the rain. Behind them stood a few soldiers, their carbines slung over their shoulders, looking uncomfortable. "Let the doctor see him," Reynolds said, his voice lacking its usual command bark. It was a request, not an order. Ahote stiffened, his eyes darting between the doctor and Tahan. To him, these men were the face of the enemy who had killed his father, but Tahan, pale and gritting his teeth against the pain, reached out his good hand and touched Ahote's knee. Let him, Tahan whispered. We need the bullet out. Reluctantly, Ahote moved aside, though he did not holster his knife. Dr. Aris knelt down, opening his leather satchel. He smelled of carbolic acid and tobacco, a sharp, civilized scent in the wild canyon. Hold him steady, the doctor said to Eliza, who was kneeling at Tahan's head. This will not be pleasant. Eliza nodded. Her dress was soaked with rain and stained with the blood of the man she loved. A week ago, the sight of so much blood would have sent her into a panic, a retreat into the dark corners of her mind where she could hide from the violence of men. But today, looking at the red smear on her own hands, she felt no trembling. This was not the blood of cruelty. It was the blood of sacrifice. It was the evidence of a life risked for hers. She placed her hands on Tahan's face, forcing him to look at her. Look at me, she said, her voice raspy but firm. Just look at me, Tahan. As the doctor probed the wound with his instruments, Tahan's back arched, and a guttural groan escaped his lips. Ahote growled low in his throat, but Eliza did not look away. She held Tahan's gaze, pouring every ounce of her strength into him, becoming the anchor in his storm of pain. Got it, Dr. Aris announced, dropping a flattened piece of lead into a metal pan with a ping. It missed the bone. Clean through the muscle. He is lucky, or blessed. The doctor began to bandage the wound efficiently. He looked at Ahote, then at Eliza, and finally at the wounded warrior. Keep it clean, the doctor said, closing his bag. He is strong. He will ride again in a week. Thank you, Eliza said. The doctor looked surprised to be thanked by the woman who had just shot a man dead in the canyon below. He tipped his hat awkwardly. Just doing my job, ma'am. Below them, the soldiers were collecting the body of Colton Briggs. There was no reverence in the task. The mercenaries he had hired had already melted away into the landscape, unpaid and uninterested in explaining themselves to the army. Briggs was wrapped in a canvas sheet and strapped over the back of a pack mule. The empire he had tried to build on fear and theft had ended in a muddy wash, with no one to mourn him. 2 days later, a very different kind of gathering took place at the fort. It was not in the grand office of the major, but in a small, neutral meeting room near the gates. A fire crackled in the hearth to ward off the damp chill. Tahan sat in a wooden chair, his arm in a sling, his face drawn but alert. Elder Hato sat beside him, wrapped in a ceremonial blanket, his ancient eyes watching everything. Across the table sat Captain Reynolds and Sheriff Daly. The sheriff looked older than he had in town. The star on his chest seemed to weigh heavy on his shirt. The report has been filed, Captain Reynolds said, tapping a stack of papers. Colton Briggs acted outside the law. His claims to the grazing lands north of the river were based on fraudulent surveys and the intimidation of federal officers. With his death, those claims are null and void. He looked at Tahan. The army acknowledges that the Quahati band acted in self-defense. The treaty stands. The cattle drive route will be shifted 20 miles east, away from your hunting grounds. It was a victory, a small one in the grand scheme of the encroaching world, but a victory nonetheless. Hato nodded slowly. The paper is good, but paper burns. We want to know if the men will keep the word. I will ensure it, Reynolds said. He looked at the sheriff. And the civil matters. Sheriff Daly cleared his throat. He shifted in his chair, unable to meet Eliza's eyes. She stood behind Tahan, her hand resting on the back of his chair. The town is quiet, Daly said. The people. They know what happened in the canyon. They know what Briggs did. He paused, twisting his hat in his hands. I want to say, I'm sorry. To you, ma'am. When that sale happened on my street, I should have stopped it. I told myself it was a private debt. I told myself it was not my business to get between a man and his property. I was wrong. Eliza looked at the lawman. She saw a man who had let his soul be eroded by the convenience of looking the other way. You let them treat me like a beast, Eliza said. Her voice was quiet, but in the small room, it hit with the force of a hammer. You watched. I did, Daly admitted. his voice thick with shame. "And I will carry that, but I promise you this. As long as I wear this star, no woman will be sold in Rio Sombra again. White, Mexican, or Comanche. The law will mean something." It was not forgiveness he was asking for, but an acknowledgement of a lesson learned in blood. Eliza nodded once. It was enough. "There is one more thing," Captain Reynolds said. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a letter. The envelope was crumpled and stained with dust. "We found this in Briggs's desk at the ranch. It seems he intercepted it 3 months ago." He slid the letter across the table to Eliza. She picked it up, her fingers brushing the familiar handwriting. It was from her aunt in St. Louis. She opened it, her eyes scanning the elegant script. "My dearest Eliza, we have only just heard of your father's passing and the terrible debts he left behind. Please, come to us immediately. We have a room prepared for you. It is a brick house with a garden, far from that savage frontier. You will be safe here. You can wear silk and drink tea and forget the horrors of the West. We have sent a bank draft to cover your travel. Come home." Eliza lowered the letter. The scent of lavender rose from the paper. A ghost of a life she had once dreamed of. A life of safety. A life where no one carried guns. Where the wind did not howl through thin walls. Where she would never be hungry or cold. Tahan watched her read. He could not read the white man's marks, but he saw the softness enter her eyes. He saw the longing for peace. He stood up, wincing as his shoulder pulled. He turned to Reynolds. "I need to speak with my wife. Alone." They walked out onto the porch of the barracks. The sun was breaking through the clouds, illuminating the muddy parade ground. Soldiers marched in formation in the distance, a machine of order and war. Tahan leaned against the railing, looking out at the open prairie beyond the gates. "You should go," he said. Eliza looked up, startled. "What?" "St. Louis," Tahan said, tasting the strange words. "It is a city of stone, no wolves, no soldiers hunting you. You will have soft beds and food that comes on plates, not from the fire." "Tahan, look at me," he said, turning to face her. His eyes were dark pools of pain, not physical, but the deep ache of the heart. "I am a warrior of a shrinking people. My life is the wind and the dust. I will fight until I die to hold on to a piece of earth that gets smaller every year. It is a hard life. Eliza, it is a life of blood." He touched the feather braided into her hair. "I bought you to save you. I did not buy you to keep you in a cage, even if that cage is my arms. If you stay with me, you will be cold. You will be hunted. You will mourn." He swallowed hard. "I love you enough to let you go to the place where you can be safe, where you can be white." Eliza looked at him. She looked at the letter in her hand. She thought of the brick house and the garden. It sounded like a fairy tale. Then she looked at the man standing before her. She saw the scar on his cheek from the canyon fight. She saw the necklace she had given him resting against his skin. She remembered the warmth of his body in the cave, the way he had sung to her when the nightmares came. She realized that the civilization her aunt offered was the same civilization that had produced Colton Briggs. It was a world of rules and walls, where monsters wore suits and hid behind laws. Here, under the vast sky, the monsters were real, but so was the honor. She crumpled the letter in her fist. "You think I want to be safe?" Eliza asked. "I was safe once, and then my father sold me. Safety is a lie. Tahan, there is only one who stands beside you when the storm comes." She walked to the railing and tossed the crumpled ball of paper into the mud. "I do not want to be white," she said fiercely. "I want to be free, and I have never been freer than when I am riding beside you." Tahan stared at her, hope warring with his protective instinct. "You sure there is no turning back?" "I burned the bridge when I pulled the trigger," she said. "I am not Eliza, the victim. I am not a girl from the East." She took his hand, interlacing her fingers with his. "I am staying." An hour later, the entire delegation gathered in the center of the fort for the formal signing of the witnessed agreement. Soldiers stood in ranks. A group of Comanche warriors, led by Ahote, sat on their horses near the gate. watching. Captain Reynolds dipped a pen in ink and signed the document. Elder Hato made his mark. Then, Reynolds looked at Eliza. "We need a witness signature, for the record." "The civilian witness?" Eliza stepped forward. She took the pen. She did not hesitate. She did not write the name of her father. She did not write the name Briggs had tried to force on her. She wrote Eliza Skye. She turned to the crowd, to the soldiers, to the sheriff, to the Comanche warriors. "My name is Eliza Skye," she said, her voice ringing clear across the parade ground. "I belong to the earth, I belong to the wind, and I choose this man, Tahan of the Quahati, as my husband and my kin. Where he rides, I ride. Where he fights, I fight." A silence held the yard for a moment. Then, from the group of warriors at the gate, Ahote raised his lance. He let out a sharp, piercing cry, not a war cry, but a cry of recognition, a salute. The soldiers did not cheer, but they nodded. They understood courage when they saw it. Later, as they prepared to leave the fort, Tahan and Eliza rode up to where Ahote waited. The stocky warrior looked at Tahan's bandaged shoulder, then at Eliza. "You shoot straight," Ahote grunted, looking at Eliza. It was the highest compliment he could give. "I had a good teacher," Eliza replied. "The winter comes," Ahote said, looking at the horizon. "The buffalo are few. We will be hungry. We will not starve," Tahan said. He gestured to the space between the fort and the distant hills. "I have been thinking. The white men need furs. We need flour, but we kill each other when we meet." "So?" Ahote asked. "So we build a place," Tahan said. "A lodge, here, on the edge. Eliza speaks their tongue. I speak to you. We trade, fair trade, no cheating, no killing." Ahote frowned, thinking. He looked at the fort, then back at the open plains. He had spent his life hating the encroachment, but he had also seen his children cry from hunger. He looked at Eliza, the white woman who had killed a white chief to save a Comanche. "A trading post," Ahote mused. "Between the worlds." He looked at Tahan. "It is a crazy thought, but maybe it is better than eating snow." He turned his horse. "I will tell Hato. If you build it, we will bring the hides." Ahote rode off, his posture less rigid than before. He had learned something in the canyon. He had learned that the enemy was not a color of skin. The enemy was greed. And honor could be found in the unlikeliest of places, even in the heart of a silent white woman. Tahan and Eliza rode out together, leaving the stone walls of the fort behind. The sun was setting, casting long golden shadows across the grass. "Eliza Skye," Tahan said, testing the name. "I like it. It fits. It feels right," she said. She looked at him, her eyes shining. "It feels like me." They turned their horses west, toward the open land where the wind never stopped blowing. They had no house. They had little money. They had a treaty that might be broken in a year. But as their shoulders brushed together, Tahan knew he was the richest man on the plains. He had ridden into town for supplies and left with a bride. But she was not silent anymore, and the life they were riding into was loud with promise. 4 years had passed since the rain washed the blood from the stones of Spirit Canyon. The seasons had turned, the winters biting deep and the summers burning hot. But the land remained as it always had, vast, indifferent, and beautiful. Yet, for the people who lived on the edge of the Quahati territory, the shape of the world had shifted. Where there had once been only an invisible line drawn in blood and suspicion, there now stood a structure of timber and stone. The sign hanging above the wide porch creaked in the prairie wind. The letters burned into the wood by a hot iron two worlds trading post. It was a busy morning. The dust of the yard was churned by the wheels of wagons and the hooves of unshod ponies. A group of Comanche women sat on blankets near the entrance, displaying intricately beaded moccasins and cured buffalo hides. A few yards away, a settler in a wagon was inspecting the hides, haggling over the price of flour and coffee. Tahan stood on the porch, leaning against a support post. He looked different than the young warrior who had ridden into Rio Sombra with a chip on his shoulder. He wore a shirt of white cotton tucked into buckskin trousers, and his hair, though still long, was tied back simply. The silver armband was still there, polished and bright, but the war paint was gone. "The price is fair, Jeremiah," Tahan said, his voice calm, cutting through the argument between the settler and the Comanche woman. 3 sacks of high-grade flour for the robe. It will keep your children warm when the snow comes. Jeremiah, a bearded man who had once sworn he would never trade with a savage, looked at the robe, then at Tahan. He nodded, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "All right, Tahan, 3 sacks, but only because your wife makes the best coffee in the territory." Tahan smiled, a slow expression that reached his eyes. "I will tell her." He watched the exchange conclude peacefully. This was his battlefield now. He was no longer the warrior who struck from the shadows. He was the bridge. When the cattlemen had disputes with the young braves over stray cows, they came to Tahan. When the army needed to move a patrol through the sacred lands to reach the northern outpost, they asked Tahan for permission, and he guided them to ensure no graves were disturbed. It was not a perfect peace. There were still hot-headed young men on both sides who wanted war. There were still nights when Tahan slept with his Winchester loaded by the door, but the trading post stood. And for 4 years, no major blood had been spilled in this valley. Tahan pushed off the post and walked toward the smaller building attached to the main store. The sound of children's voices drifted through the open window. Inside, the room was filled with sunlight. Benches made of split logs were arranged in rows. Sitting on them were a dozen children. Some wore the calico dresses and trousers of the settlers. Others wore the soft leather of the Comanche. They sat side by side, a sight that would have been impossible a few years ago. Standing at the front of the room was Eliza Skye. She was 24 years old now, and the girl who had been broken on the steps of the saloon was gone. In her place was a woman of striking presence. Her hair was pulled back, revealing a face that glowed with health and purpose. She wore a dress of blue wool, simple but elegant, with a Comanche belt cinched at her waist. She held a piece of slate in her hand. On it, she had written the word, freedom. "Who can tell me what this word means?" Eliza asked. Her voice was clear and strong. Carrying to the back of the room, a small Comanche boy raised his hand. "It means riding the pony fast, no fences." Eliza smiled. "That is true. Little bear, no fences. It means nobody can tell you to shut up." A girl with blonde braids piped up. She was the daughter of the blacksmith in Rio Sombra. Eliza's smile softened, tinged with memory. "That is also true, Sarah. It means your voice belongs to you, and only you." The door opened, and a small whirlwind of energy burst into the room. Mama Papa, a little girl, perhaps 3 or 4 years old, ran in. She had Tahan's dark skin and high cheekbones, but her eyes were the startling, piercing blue of her mother. She wore a miniature buckskin dress adorned with tiny bells that chimed as she moved. "Sia," Eliza scolded gently, though her eyes were laughing. "We are in school." Sia ignored the lesson. She ran to Tahan, who had stepped into the doorway, and wrapped her arms around his leg. Tahan reached down and scooped her up, lifting her high until her head almost brushed the ceiling beams. "Did you catch the wind today, little bird?" Tahan asked in Comanche. "I caught a lizard," Sia replied in perfect English, then switched to Comanche to add, "And Grandfather Ahote showed me how to find the honey." She was the living embodiment of the trading post. She moved between the languages and the cultures without a second thought, unaware that the world expected her to be one or the other. To Sia, she was simply whole. "Class is dismissed for the midday meal," Eliza announced. The children scrambled out, shouting and laughing, a chaotic mix of languages spilling into the yard. Eliza wiped the slate clean and walked over to her husband and daughter. Tahan lowered Sia, who immediately ran outside to chase a dog. Tahan watched his daughter go, then turned to Eliza. He touched her cheek. "You look tired." "It is very tiring," Eliza said, leaning into his hand. "Sarah read a whole sentence today, and Little Bear stopped hitting the other boys." "You are building something stronger than walls." "Eliza Skye." Tahan said, "We are building it." she corrected him. She looked out the window at the trading post. Do you remember when we thought we would have to run forever? I remember, Tahan said. I remember the rain in the cave. I remember the silence. The silence is gone, Eliza said firmly. Now, there is only noise, and I love it. That evening, as the sun began to lower, painting the prairie in gold and violet, they closed the post. They mounted their horses, Tahan on his aging paint stallion, Eliza on a sturdy mare, with Sia riding in front of her father, and rode out toward their home. Their cabin sat a mile away, nestled in a grove of cottonwood trees near the creek. It was a log cabin, built solid against the winter, but in the yard stood a traditional teepee, kept for guests or for nights when the house felt too confining. As they rode, a low rumble shook the ground. From the south, a herd of wild mustangs crested the hill. They were magnificent, a flowing river of muscle and mane, running simply because they could. Sia pointed, squealing with delight. Puku puku! Tahan slowed his horse. Watch them. Sia, he said softly. Look at the led mare. See how she turns her ears. She is listening to the earth. Why are they running? Papa, Sia asked. Because the grass is green over the hill, Tahan said, and because they have no masters. Eliza watched the horses, then looked at the small skateboard strapped to their saddlebags. You teach her to read the tracks. Eliza said to Tahan, I will teach her to read the books. She will need both. Yes, Tahan agreed. The tracks will feed her body. The books will feed her mind. She will not be like us. Eliza, she will not have to choose. They continued their ride, but instead of going straight home, they turned north toward a small, grassy knoll that overlooked the entrance to Spirit Canyon. There were no stone markers here, just a few mounds of earth that had settled over the years. The grass grew thick and green over them. This was where the bodies from the canyon fight had been buried before the authorities moved some of them. But the memory remained. Tahan lifted Sia down and let her play in the flowers a safe distance away. He stood back, his hat in his hand, while Eliza walked to the center of the knoll. She stood over the place where the spirit of Colton Briggs had left the world. For a long time, she had hated him. She had hated him with a fire that kept her awake at night, but the fire had cooled into ash. You were a small man. Colton, Eliza spoke to the wind. Her voice was not angry. It was filled with a strange, distant pity. You thought you could buy the world. You thought you could buy me. You thought that owning things made you a king. She looked at the vast horizon, at the sun dipping below the edge of the world. I have a cabin with a leaking roof, she said. I have my hands rough from work. I have a husband who smells of horses and smokes. I do not have your silk, or your silver, or your big house. She took a deep breath of the sweet, clean air. But I can walk where I please. I can speak when I want. And when I sleep, I have no fear. She turned her back on the grave. You were wrong, she whispered. The path I chose was not luxury. It was freedom, and it was worth every drop of blood. She walked back to Tahan. He did not ask what she had said. He simply took her hand, and they walked back to the horses. When they returned to the trading post the next day, a wagon had stopped by the watering trough. It was an old, rickety thing, pulled by a mule that looked as tired as the man driving it. The man was thin and anxious, his eyes darting around as if he expected to be attacked. Sitting on the wagon bench beside him was a young boy, perhaps 10 years old. He was wrapped in a coat that was too big for him. His face was smudged with dirt, but under the grime, his skin was pale and bruised. His eyes were wide, dark hollows of terror. He did not move. He did not speak. He stared at his hands, which were clasped tightly in his lap. Eliza was sweeping the porch. She stopped. She knew that look. She knew the way the boy held his shoulders, hunched forward to protect his heart. She knew the silence that was not peace, but a fortress built against pain. The man climbed down. We are heading to California, he stammered to Tahan, who had stepped out. I just need water. Don't have much money. Water is free, Tahan said gently. Rest your mule. Eliza leaned her broom against the wall. She walked down the steps. She did not look at the man. She walked straight to the side of the wagon where the boy sat. The boy flinched as she approached, shrinking back against the seat. Eliza stopped. She did not try to touch him. She did not speak to him in a loud, cheerful voice. She did not tell him it would be okay. She simply sat down on the edge of the watering trough, bringing herself to his eye level. She waited. The boy watched her, suspicious. Eliza reached into her pocket and pulled out a piece of hard candy she kept for the school children. She held it out on her open palm. She did not say a word. She just offered it, her blue eyes steady and kind, the silence stretched between them. It was a conversation without words. "I see you," her eyes said. "I know the dark place you are in. I have been there. You do not have to speak to be heard." Slowly, agonizingly, the boy reached out. His hand trembled. He took the candy. Eliza smiled. It was a small, private smile. She pointed to herself. "Eliza," she whispered. The boy looked at the candy, then at her. He did not speak, but his shoulders dropped an inch. The terror in his eyes receded just enough to let a flicker of light in. He nodded. A tiny, almost imperceptible motion. Eliza stood up. She nodded back. She knew he would carry his scars, just as she carried hers. But she also knew that today he had met someone who understood, and sometimes that was enough to start the journey back to the world of the living. That night, the wind howled outside the cabin, a reminder that winter was coming. But inside, the fire roared in the stone hearth, casting a warm, golden glow over the room. Sia was sitting on the buffalo rug, playing with a wooden doll Tahan had carved for her. Tahan sat in his chair, repairing a bridle. Eliza sat near the fire, sewing a patch onto Tahan's winter coat. "Papa, Mama," Sia looked up. "Tell me the story." "Which story, little bird?" Tahan asked. "The story of how you met," Sia demanded. "The story of the town." Tahan looked at Eliza. They shared a look that contained 1,000 memories: the dust of the street, the rope on her wrists, the storm in the canyon, the gunshot that ended Briggs. "It is a long story," Tahan said, "and some of it is sad." "I want to hear it," Sia insisted. Eliza set her sewing down. She motioned for Sia to come closer. The little girl scrambled into her mother's lap, curling up against her chest. "Once upon a time," Eliza began, her voice soft and melodious, "there was a town made of dust and hard hearts. And in that town, there was a girl who had lost her voice because she was very afraid." "Like the boy on the wagon?" Sia asked. "Yes," Eliza said, stroking her daughter's hair. "Just like him. She thought she would never speak again. She thought she was all alone." "But she wasn't," Sia said confidently. "No," Tahan said, his voice deep and rumbling like the earth. "Because one day, a young warrior rode into that town. He was looking for salt and flour. He was looking for things to keep his people alive. He was a Comanche," Sia said proudly. "He was." Tahan nodded. "And when he saw the girl, he saw that she was not a thing to be sold. He saw that she was a spirit caught in a trap." "So what did he do?" Sia asked, though she knew the answer by heart. Eliza looked at Tahan, her eyes shining in the firelight. "He gave everything he had," Eliza said. "He gave his silver. He gave his best horse. He gave his safety. He broke the trap, and he took her hand. And then, Eliza whispered, the young Comanche rode into town for supplies and left with a bride. But that is only the beginning of the story," Tahan added, "because the bride was not really silent. She had a voice that was louder than thunder, and she used that voice to save him back. And then they had me," Sia cheered. "And then they had you." Eliza kissed the top of her head. "And they built a house between the two worlds, so that you would never have to be silent, and you would never have to be sold." Sia yawned, her eyes drooping. "It is a good story." "It is the best story," Tahan said. He stood up and carried his sleeping daughter to her bed in the corner. He tucked the quilt around her, the quilt Eliza had stitched with patterns of stars and eagles. When he returned to the fire, Eliza was standing by the window, looking out. Tahan moved behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. She leaned back against him, resting her head on his shoulder. Outside, the clouds had parted. The sky of the American West stretched out above them, an endless canopy of velvet pinned with 1 billion stars. It was a vast, uncaring universe, filled with danger and cold. But in the reflection of the window, they saw only themselves, a man and a woman who had crossed a chasm of hatred to find each other. "The future is not perfect," Tahan murmured, looking at the darkness. "The world is changing fast. The fences are coming." "Let them come," Eliza said softly. "We have the horses, we have the words, and we have each other." The young Comanche and the silent bride. Tahan mused. "They will make a song for us one day." "Let them sing," Eliza smiled, turning to kiss him. "But let them know, we lived it." They stood together, 2 small flames in the vast night, watching the stars wheel overhead, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a long journey from the dusty streets of Rio Sombra to this quiet cabin under the stars. If you enjoyed the tale of Tahan and Eliza, please let me know in the comments. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Are you in a bustling city like St. Louis, or somewhere out near the open plains? Please share your thoughts on the ending. And if you want to hear more stories like this, make sure to subscribe to my channel, Wild West Tales. Like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach more people. Your support keeps the campfire burning. Until next time, keep writing.